Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on Snap Inc.
Snap Inc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got a stack of their financial reports,
All right.
internal documents ready to break down.
Let's do it.
And, I think people are going to be pretty surprised to see how this company actually works.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think about Snapchat, they think about, disappearing photos, funny filters.
Right.
But their business model goes way deeper than that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start with how Snap Inc. is bringing in the money.
Well, if you look at their 10Q reports,
Okay.
it tells a pretty consistent story. Advertising is their bread and butter.
Okay.
So those Snap ads you see, the
Yeah.
branded AR experiences, that's where the bulk of their revenue comes from.
So they've really doubled down on advertising.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that make them pretty vulnerable to, like changes in the advertising market or privacy regulations?
Absolutely. For example, when Apple implemented those privacy changes a while back,
Right.
Snap's 2024 10Q reports
Yeah.
revealed a pretty noticeable dip in revenue directly tied to those changes,
Wow.
which, it suggests that they might be a little overly reliant on targeted advertising, making them susceptible to shifts in the tech landscape.
Okay. So advertising is the revenue engine.
Yes.
What about the costs? What are some of their biggest expenses?
Well, maintaining a platform like Snapchat is no easy feat.
Right.
And you can see that reflected in their financial statements. A really big chunk of their expenses goes to what they call third-party infrastructure partners.
Okay.
So essentially, they're paying companies like Google, Amazon for things like hosting, storage, bandwidth, all of the things that keep Snapchat running smoothly.
I see. So those massive data centers and servers are not cheap.
Not cheap at all.
And I imagine they have a huge team of engineers and developers constantly updating the app.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and their 10K reports highlight substantial investments in R&D. They're constantly trying to push the boundaries of what's possible with AR and social interaction.
So then what makes Snapchat stand out? Because it's such a crowded social media landscape. Like, why are people choosing Snapchat over, say, Instagram or TikTok?
Right. Well, that's where their customer value proposition comes in.
Yep.
And their 10K report actually gives us some insight into that. They talk a lot about focusing on privacy, fostering a genuine community, and offering creative tools for self-expression.
So it's not just about, like, disappearing messages.
No.
They're really trying to create like a different kind of social media experience.
Yeah, it seems like that's their goal. In fact, they describe Snapchat as, quote, an antidote
Oh, wow.
to the often impersonal and performative nature of other platforms.
I see.
They're really pushing back against this pressure of likes,
Yeah.
curated perfection, and emphasizing authenticity.
Interesting. So they're tapping into, like, people wanting more privacy and more meaningful connections.
Yeah.
But what about, like, their technology? What about their investment in AR? Does that play into their differentiation strategy?
Absolutely. While other platforms have dabbled in AR, Snap has really made it central to their strategy. They're betting big that AR will be like the next major evolution in social interaction. And, they're putting their money where their mouth is, investing heavily in tools that empower users and brands to create immersive AR experiences.
Yeah. And if AR really does take off the way they think it will, that gamble could pay off big time, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, that's what makes them stand out. It's what makes them unique.
Exactly. They're not just another social media platform chasing the same trends, They're trying to define the future of social interaction.
Right.
And that's a bold, risky move.
Yeah.
But it could be a game changer.
Okay. So we've got this advertising revenue, these huge infrastructure costs, and this real commitment to a very different kind of social media experience.
Yeah.
So what are, like, the day-to-day activities that keep all of this going?
Well, their 10K filings actually shed some light on that. Unsurprisingly, user growth and engagement are at the very top of the list. I mean, they really live and die by how many people are using Snapchat daily.
Right.
And how actively they're engaging with the platform.
That makes sense. More users, more engagement, more ad revenue. It all comes full circle.
Exactly. But they're also, they recognize the importance of maintaining strong relationships with those third-party infrastructure partners we talked about.
Right.
Because they're reliant on those partnerships for essential services.
I see. So they've got to keep the users happy and engaged.
Right.
Keep the servers running, keep those partnerships strong. It sounds like a lot to juggle.
Yeah, it is. It's a complex ecosystem with a lot of moving parts.
Now, there's one more piece of this puzzle that we need to discuss. And it's something that makes Snap stand out not just in social media, but in the corporate world in general.
Okay.
And that's their ownership structure.
Ah, yes, their ownership structure. This is where things get really interesting. We found some pretty surprising details buried in their most recent 10Q report.
Yeah, and it sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah.
But before we jump into that, let's unpack what makes their ownership structure so unique.
Sure. So their co-founders, Evan Spiegel and Robert Murphy,
Right.
they have almost complete control over the company,
Okay.
even though their Class A common stock is non-voting.
What?
Yeah, it's very unusual.
So most shareholders don't actually have a say in how the company's run.
That's right. So they hold a special class of shares, Class C shares,
Right.
and that grants them a majority of the voting power,
Okay.
which means that they can effectively control all stockholder decisions, even if most shareholders disagree. It's
Yeah.
a very powerful position to be in.
So they have a lot of freedom to steer the company.
Uh-huh.
But it also raises some questions about accountability and transparency.
Hmm.
And that's something I want to dig into after we take a quick break to gather our thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. The implications of this structure are pretty far-reaching
Right.
and deserve a closer look. We'll explore all of that in detail when we come back.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been unpacking Snap Inc.'s business model, and before the break, we were talking about that unusual ownership structure. You know, it really has sparked a lot of discussion. Some people say it gives those founders the autonomy they need to execute their long-term vision
Right.
without being beholden to the whims of the market,
Yeah.
short-sighted investors.
But couldn't that level of control also have, like, potential downsides? Some critics might see it as, you know, a lack of accountability. Like,
Yeah.
what's to stop the founders from making decisions that benefit them personally, even if
Mhm.
they aren't in the best interest of the other shareholder?
Right. And that's a really crucial question because, traditional corporate governance structures are there to provide checks and balances and make sure everyone's interests are considered.
Right.
But this kind of concentrated control, it could upset that balance a little bit. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
So potential for really bold leadership,
Right.
but also the risk of kind of unchecked power.
Hmm.
Seems like a delicate balance.
It is. And remember, this structure isn't just about control, it's also about incentives.
Okay.
So the co-founder's personal wealth is tied very closely to how well the company does, right?
Yeah.
Given their voting power. So it creates a very strong incentive to drive success.
Okay. So it's high stakes for everyone involved. We've talked about revenue. We've talked about costs, their value proposition, what they need to do to operate, and then this really unique power structure.
Yeah.
What about the challenges they face going forward? What are the things that they need to overcome to stay competitive?
Well, we've touched on some of them, just now.
Yeah.
But it's worth kind of digging a little deeper. I mean, the competition in social media is fierce, right?
Right. Yeah.
It seems like every day a new platform pops up.
Yeah.
So Snap has to remain agile and innovative to keep up.
Okay. So they're constantly trying to stay ahead. But what are the specific threats?
Well, like we were saying before, privacy regulations are a big one. Those can really impact their ad revenue. And their 10Q reports also suggest that their user growth has slowed down a bit, especially in more established markets.
So they're facing a saturation problem.
Yeah, to a certain extent. So they're going to have to get creative, reach new audiences domestically, internationally.
Yeah.
But they need to do it in a way that stays true to their customer value proposition, right? They can't just become another generic social media platform.
Right. They need to hold on to that identity that makes them unique and, attracts those users in the first place.
Exactly.
But it's not just attracting new users. It's also about keeping the ones they have. So how are they approaching that?
User engagement is key.
Right.
They got to constantly be innovating, adding new features, experiences that keep people coming back for more. And that push into AR, that's a big part of that strategy.
But can AR really be the answer? I mean, it seems like a big bet on something that's still pretty new.
It is a gamble. But if they're right about this, the future of social interaction, it could pay off in a huge way. Remember, they're not just adding AR, they're building their whole platform around it.
Okay, so fighting competition, navigating privacy issues, cracking the code on user engagement, anything else keeping them up at night?
Well, I think their reliance on those third-party infrastructure partners,
Right.
that's a vulnerability that we haven't really fully explored. Remember how much they depend on companies like Google and Amazon for these essential services.
Yeah. So, like, what happens if those relationships sour or those services get disrupted somehow?
Well, it could have a big impact on their operations. They're kind of walking a tightrope there,
Yeah.
balancing internal development with that dependence on external partners.
So it sounds like Snap is facing a lot of pressure coming from different directions.
They are.
How do they plan to navigate all of that? What are they doing to mitigate these risks?
Well, for example, they're investing a lot in cybersecurity, implementing these very strict data protection policies.
Right.
They have a whole team focused on threat monitoring and response, so they clearly get how serious a potential data breach could be.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be devastating for their reputation, their business, everything.
So they're not shying away from the challenges. They're really confronting them.
Absolutely, yeah. They're tackling these issues head on, very proactive approach.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how that unique control structure we talked about plays into all of this.
Yeah.
Will that freedom, that agility allow them to adapt faster?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore further when we move on to the next part of our deep dive into Snap Inc. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really been digging into Snap Inc.'s business model, from their dependence on advertising to those big infrastructure costs, and of course their unusual ownership structure.
Yeah, and amidst all of that, one thing that really stands out to me is just how much information they actually disclose.
Right.
Their reports, their documents, they give us a level of transparency that you don't always see, especially with tech companies.
Yeah, they don't shy away from the details.
Yeah.
You can really get a sense of their priorities, their concerns, even a little bit of their company culture.
Exactly. Like in their 10K report, they spend a good chunk of it talking about their commitment to building a positive and inclusive workplace.
Mhm.
Employee well-being, fostering community, promoting ethical conduct.
Yeah, it's refreshing to see that focus on company culture.
Hmm.
Do you think it's genuine or is it just, PR?
It's hard to say for sure, but I mean, think about it. Attracting and retaining top talent is huge in tech, right?
Yeah,
And having a good work environment, that could be a big selling point.
right. It's not just about appealing to users, it's about appealing to potential employees too. It's all
Mhm.
connected.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's get back to those risks and challenges we were talking about. We talked about competition, privacy concerns, market saturation, reliance on those third-party infrastructure partners. But there's another big one I saw in their 10K, cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah. Cybersecurity is a major concern for any company that handles a lot of user data, and Snap is no exception. They know that data breaches and cyber attacks are a constant threat, and they lay out all the steps they're taking to mitigate those risks right in their report.
So, what are they actually doing to protect that data?
Well, they're spending a ton on security measures, strict data protection policies, and they have a whole team dedicated to, monitoring threats and responding. They're not messing around.
And they can't afford to, right?
Yeah.
Big data breach could really damage their reputation and their business.
Absolutely. It would totally contradict their whole message about privacy and trust.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot, we've really looked at Snap Inc. from different angles.
Yeah, we have.
But for the average person using Snapchat, what does it all mean? What's the takeaway?
I think the big thing is this. Every time we use these platforms, it all feeds into this giant business ecosystem. Our data is being collected, analyzed, and used to make money.
So even our snaps, our chats, it's all part of a bigger picture.
It is.
So should we be worried about using these platforms then?
Not necessarily. I mean, they do provide value, connecting people, creative outlets, but we have to be aware of the trade-off, right? We're giving our data to get access to these services, and it's up to each of us to decide if that's okay.
And that's where, Snap's emphasis on privacy is interesting.
Right.
They're really trying to be the more privacy-conscious option. But whether they can actually live up to that, well, that's another question.
It is. And it's something that everyone will be watching closely. Users, regulators, privacy advocates. They need to prove they're serious about privacy if they want to keep that trust.
It's a high-stakes game for sure.
Hmm.
But it's clear that Snap Inc. isn't just any other tech company.
Hmm.
They're really pushing boundaries, testing new technologies, challenging the way things are usually done.
Yeah, and their whole journey with all the ups and downs, it's really a fascinating case study for anyone interested in the future of social media, technology, this balance between innovation and responsibility.
We've really peeled back the layers today. But as our listeners continue to, navigate the world of social media, what's one thing you want them to think about?
I'd say this. Think critically about the platforms you use.
Okay.
Think about the data you share. Ask yourself, what does this company stand for? How are they using my info? And does that sit right with me?
Yeah, that's such an important question.
Mhm.
It's easy to get caught up in all the new features, but taking a step back is so crucial.
Absolutely. The more we know about how these companies work, the better decisions we can make about our online lives.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Snap Inc. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring.